We'd like to welcome everyone out to this afternoon's Planning and Zoning meeting. We'd like to remind you that any of those that wish to discuss any of the items listed on this need to fill out a blue card. And that needs to be done post-haste because we will be voting on the consent agenda, and most of these cases are on the consent agenda. The second item would be your cell phones. Please make sure they are on airplane mode or silence or vibrate in some other way that won't disturb the meeting today. We have a short video that we'd like to show you all, and if they could run that right now.
Welcome to the City of Mesa Planning and Zoning Board meeting. We appreciate your interest in the future development of our community and welcome your comments. At this time, we ask you to turn off or select the vibrate option on your cell phones and pagers. Today's agenda includes a consent agenda. These items will be read into the record and acted on in one motion. If you would like to speak on any of these items, please fill out one of the blue cards located in the back of the room and bring it to the front railing. These items will then be removed from the consent agenda and voted on individually. Each case will be heard first by the applicant, then the public, followed by city staff and board members. The Planning and Zoning Board will then make their recommendations to the City Council. The City Council meetings are held twice a month at 5:45 p.m. in the Council chambers. To find out when the City Council will consider your planning and zoning item, please call the Planning Division at 480-644-2385 or log on to the city's website. All planning and zoning meetings are broadcast live and rebroadcast on Mesa Channel 11. To view the programming schedule, log on to www.mesachannel11.com.
If they could be filled out real quick. While you're doing that, we will deal with our first item of business, which is to consider the minutes from the July 9th study session and the July 10th regular hearing. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the July 9th, July 10th study and regular hearing meeting minutes.
All right, thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, please cast your votes, board members. I think it passes unanimously. It passes unanimously. A magic screen came back up. All right. Our next item of business is the consent agenda. So we'll wait till this individual is finished filling out his blue card.
Mr. Carter?
Yes, sir.
I need to recuse myself on a couple of items that would be on the consent agenda. Item C1, I have a conflict on, and item E1 and E2 are a related case that I may have a conflict on, and I want to recuse myself until I can find out for sure.
All right, thank you for declaring that. It is in the record. E1 and E2? Okay.
That's the one he wants to do. That's one for continue.
Okay, this is on items E1, which is the GP minor 13-005 and Z13-035, correct, both of those? All right. Does the do you understand that they are up for continuance until the October meeting? Do you still wish to speak to them? Yes. Okay. Then we'll hear from Mr. Arnett first on our first consent agenda, removing items.
That's Ms. Johnson.
Oh, that's right, it is. I'm sorry.
So I'll remove
E1 and E2.
Okay. The first consent agenda is for Z13, 40 in District 5, 4863 East Ingram Street, located west of Higley Road, south of McKellips Road. approximately 7.7 acres. This is a site plan review. This request will allow the expansion of existing office and warehouse in the LI zoning district. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions.
All right, do I hear a motion on this consent agenda?
Move for approval as read.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a second? All right, please cast your votes, board members. Passes unanimously with Ms. Coombs abstaining. All right, it's now time to go to our second consent agenda. Mr. Arnett has volunteered to read this. It's quite lengthy, so bear up and be
Volunteer is an interesting word. The consent agenda for the Planning and Zoning hearing Wednesday, August 21st, the second consent agenda, starting with item D2, case Z13-034 in District 5, the 2000 block of North Sossaman Road and the 7600 block of East McKellips Road, located at the northeast corner of Sossaman Road and McKellips Road, approximately just under 8.5 acres. Site plan review in the RS-15 PAD zoning district. This request will allow residential development on the site, and the staff recommendation is approval with conditions. D3, case Z13-036 in District 6, 2900 to 3000 blocks of South Sossaman Road, west side, located south of Guadalupe Road, west of Sossaman Road, approximately 46 acres. Modification of the PAD for Desert Place at Morrison Ranch lots 87 to 133 and 234 to 278 in the RS7 PAD zoning district. This request will allow residential lot coverage to increase from 45% to 50%, and the staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Excuse me. Z13-037, District 5, the 8800 block of East Upper Canyon Drive, located north of McKellips Road, west of Ellsworth Road, approximately a little over 17.5 acres, rezoned from RS35 PAD to RS15 PAD, and site plan review. This request will allow residential development on parcel 4B at Mountain Bridge, and the staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Next is case Z13-038 in District 5, the 8900 block of East Desert Foothills Drive on the south side, located south of McKellips Road, west of Ellsworth Road. A little over 28 acres, rezoned from RS9 PAD and RS35 PAD to RS15 PAD, and site plan review. This request will allow residential development on parcels 19 and 28 at Mountain Bridge, and the staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Next, Z13-039, as well in District 5, growing area, the 8700 block of East Upper Canyon Drive, located north of McKellips Road, east of Hawes Road. Over 28 acres, rezoned from RS35 PAD to RS15 PAD, and site plan review. This request will allow residential development on parcel 9 at Mountain Bridge. Staff recommendation, approval with conditions. Case Z13-041 in District 2, 4142 East Valley Auto Drive, located west of Greenfield Road, north of Baseline Road. Just under 6 acres, rezoning from LI PAD to LI and site plan review. This request will allow the development of a self-storage facility in the light industrial zoning district with a stipulation as modified in the study session. Next, Z13-042 in District 6, 5200 to 5500 blocks of South Signal Butte Road, and 5200 to 5500 blocks of South Mountain Road, located between Signal Butte Road and Mountain Road, just south of Ray Road. Almost 127 acres, modification of the Bella Via PAD for parcels 12 to 15, which is formerly known as Mountain Horizons PAD, and rezoned from RS9 PAD and RM2 PAD to RS6 PAD. This request will allow residential development, and the staff recommendation is approval with conditions. I don't know if I said the staff recommendations on item D7, but that is also approval with conditions. Sorry.
You did.
Good. Just making sure. Thank you. Then moving right along, it's great to have residential development taking place in our wonderful city. So item F1, which is a preliminary plat for Eastmark, 7-50 Phase 2 in District 6, the 5,000 block of South Eastmark Parkway, and the 5,000 block of South Inspirion Parkway, located approximately a half mile west of Signal Butte Road and a quarter of a mile north of Ray Road. Just under 11 acres. This request will allow the creation of individual parcels for a school, a park, and a fire station within Development Unit 7 of the Eastmark Community Plan. And the staff recommendation is approval with conditions and adding an additional condition of Condition 6, which was added in the study session. The rest are all that I'm going to read are all preliminary plats as outlined in the agenda that has been issued, and they are items F2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and they are respectively Sossaman and McKellips, District 5, Mountain Bridge, Parcel 4B, Mountain Bridge Parcel 19 and 28, Mountain Bridge Parcel 9, and Bella Via, District 6, and those are all recommended for approval with conditions. Did I miss anything, staff? Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Arnett. Okay, we have our consent agenda. Do I have a motion? Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Please cast your votes. The second consent agenda passes unanimously. So if your project or case was on the consent agenda, please feel free to leave. You are approved until the City Council meeting, which is indicated on your agenda. Our first item, we would like to change the agenda just slightly to hear Mr. Rockland on items E1 and E2. Would you please come forward and state your name and address? Oh, yes, Ms. Coombs is in declaration of
Conflict.
Mr. Rockland, do you have your name and address, please?
Okay, my name is Stanley Rockland. I'm at 10233 East Posada. We're in Santa Rita Ranch. I got a call at noon today from the president of the HOA. Can you go to this meeting? I'm called into work. This is to make sure I'm talking about the same thing you are. It's on the northwest corner of Signal Butte and Elliott, and it's a proposed strip mall with an anchor store, and we have been to a meeting and seen all the architectural renderings, and our HOA board feels that they would like to urge you to vote to let it go ahead.
Okay.
End of message.
This is continued to the October regular meeting.
Okay.
So we would appreciate your presence there also.
We'll be back.
All right. Thank you,
you,
Mr.
sir.
Rockland.
Thank you all.
Staff, do you wish to say anything to this? All right, then on cases E1 and E2, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to continue GP minor 13005 and Z13035 until the October 16th meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you. Please cast your votes. It is excuse me, Ms. Hudson and Ms. Coombs have abstained, but it passes unanimously.
She made it.
Were you in favor? Yes. Okay, thank you. Let the record show that Ms. Hudson was in favor of the project, and she was not abstaining for conflict reasons. All right, our last item in business is D1, which is Z13-033HL, dealing with the historic landmark overlay of the old library building, now the technology building.
Thank you,
Jason,
Chairman.
go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Carter and board members. So the one item that we do have on hearing tonight is for the what's currently the IT building, but formerly the Mesa Public Library that was designed by architect Robert Hickman and built in 1959. It is an example of the post-World War II modern formalism style of steel and precast concrete exposed structural systems. And so the intent of us moving forward with this is, one, to kind of back up and look at, is this request in conformance with the general plan? And it is. We do have a section within the plan that refers to redevelopment and historic preservation Mesa, and the site is located within the town center redevelopment area, which specifically calls for the preservation of historical assets in the city. So looking at that, the city does own the building. It's currently our ITD building. It's had significant modifications done primarily to the interior to accommodate our IT needs. And we have specifically gone through and, for the most part, vetted the request over the last year by presenting it to the Mesa City Council back in December of 2012. And the discussion there specifically requested that we move to preserve the defining architectural characteristics of the building while still allowing for modifications as necessary to accommodate the city's IT and perhaps even future needs. Of course, there's the Urban Plaza project. We want to make sure that we move forward with that in the future while still preserving the wave archway over the back and primarily the plate glass lobby with the floating staircase and the chandelier. So at that time, the City Council advised staff to initiate the rezoning request that was signed by the city manager, and the intent is to, 1, recognize the historic nature of the building, 2, commit to preserving the wave-covered sidewalks and entry area at the northeast corner, and 3, allow modifications and additions to the east, south, and west sides of the building in a manner that maintains the integrity of the existing building. So as you look through to the staff report, particularly on page 4, staff has specifically crafted the overlay standards for which any modifications to the building would be held against as it goes through the Historic Preservation Office, and that would be, for the most part, with John. We wrote these conditions out. It was presented to the Historic Preservation Board last month, and they unanimously recommended approval. And we're bringing it forward to you as well with the staff recommendation for approval subject to the conditions listed. I'd be happy to answer questions.
All right. We'd also, at this point, unless staff has any questions for staff at this moment, then we'd like to ask Mr. Ron Peters or Ms. Donna Bench to please come forward, whoever's going to be the spokesman, and state your name and address for this completely unknown person.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Ron Peters. I reside at 1711 East Brown Road in Mesa, Arizona, and I'm a preservation architect. I guess in many cases this was my initiation about 1.5 years or 2 years ago to recommend then to the Historic Preservation Board putting this on a landmark overlay status. Over the years, I've been involved in Mesa historic architecture, and with Mr. Linoff, we produced the Mesa's Vanishing Architecture. We've lost more in this community than I even want to begin to go over with this committee. A lot of very nice architecture in this community has been torn down over the years. We have identified through the Historic Preservation Board a lot of those elements that we think are very important to the development of the city over many years. Horlbeck and Hickman were one of the premier architectural firms in the valley, East Valley at the time. This building was done in 1959. Charles Hickman was on the city council. He's on this P&Z board. He served the community well. This is a prime example of post-World War II architecture that uses a lot of the features that had been identified by Edward Durrell Stone in the U.S. embassies that he did in New Delhi. It's almost identical to that building, as well as Oscar Niemeyer's work at Brasilia with the use of free-flowing and formed concrete that he used in the wave covering canopies on the back. This is a premier piece of post-World War II architecture that I don't believe the city of Mesa should allow to disappear for any reason. It should be integrated into the design of this community, period, and it can be. So the Historic Preservation Committee, I believe, is unanimous in recommending approval. I believe this is something that we need to start identifying. We can't just allow a lot of our historic architecture to disappear. We've met with IT. We've told them that we're not interested in seeing them not be able to use the building for what it's being used for now. Hopefully, we could convince the mayor and the city council at some point in time to fund an IT facility that would better fit the needs of information technology. And as the mayor mentioned at the time, he says, years to come, we probably will be all being handled by Google, and we won't need an IT building, and that very well might be the case. But for now, it's something. The building is structurally sound. It is in great shape, and it can be used for many generations to come. And we can still be able to point to it and say that's one of the early libraries in our city. So we would really hope that the P&Z would support this effort in recognizing this very important piece of Mesa's architectural history. I'll be available to answer any questions if you want me to.
All right, thank you, Mr. Peters. Board members, are there any questions for Mr. Peters before he runs off too far?
I had one, if you don't mind. It's a general question, and that would be, are you basically in the process of identifying properties throughout the community that you would like to identify or put this historic landmark overlay on, and this happens just to be one at this point in time?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Clement, yes, sir. We've, as the Mesa Preservation Foundation Board, which is a nonprofit organization in Mesa, basically identified to recognize historic features of this community. The Preservation Board recently was involved in the raising of the money and saving the diving lady. That was one of our major fundraising efforts that we did, was when it fell over, to try to make sure that we could save that. The Citrus building has been identified by the Preservation Board as another building that we'd like to see saved and brought into the fold of preservation in this community. The other thing is we are looking at an overlay district or something in the downtown area so that we can start identifying a lot of those historic structures that are within the downtown that really deserve to be protected. And we have the Alhambra Hotel. We have a lot of buildings on Main Street that are hidden. They're really hidden gems that over the years have been covered up, and their architectural features have been destroyed, but they're still there. Several of them, the Paul Sale building has received a wonderful, renovation and, revitalization. There's other buildings in downtown that can follow the same thing that we would like to see. Is this a first one? It's one that we just felt was necessary to identify so that we knew about the Plaza project coming on board, and we just didn't want to see this building kind of get lost in that overall effort, and we want to see it integrated into a comprehensive downtown design. So there's, I don't know if I answered your question totally, but.
Well, sort of. What I gathered out of this is a fairly new initiative, and this is one of the first properties that's on your list. Now, when you talk about the Diving Lady, that was privately owned, and this is publicly owned. So there would be a lot of hearings before anything would happen
Absolutely.
to this building. And if it were a private matter, you wouldn't have quite the influence because you'd be subject to the ownership. So, I'm wondering why this building per se, and that's what is driving this question.
Fortunately, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Clement, fortunately, unfortunately or fortunately, sometimes our public government, our municipal government, our state government, our federal government are the stewards of a tremendous amount of our history and our historic properties. They just build buildings, and the buildings are kept over a long period of time under their ownership. So after that 50-year period, they become significant and eligible for the National Register. Now, we're not asking that this be put on the National Register at this point in time. We're just saying we want Mesa to recognize it. The very first building that this city put on the landmark status was the, please tell me, was the Irving School. The Irving School was placed, it was our first landmark building in the city of Mesa. And the city published this in their publication when they came out the next year. And the premier thing that they said was, the Irving School, we made it a landmark. It's Mesa's first landmark building. And, that's the first. We need more. We need to recognize that there's a tremendous amount of rich heritage in this community that the government owns. The government are the stewards of that property, and I believe along with the ownership of that property, you have a stewardship requirement to take care of that property and make sure it's passed on to other generations. So the governments, you guys tend to have a lot of the history and a lot of those historic structures, and so there's a responsibility that goes on with that, with owning of those buildings. I restore a tremendous amount of historic properties for the federal government on military bases. Constantly, we're restoring and saving old barracks buildings, old administration buildings. Camp Navajo, we just redid the administration building up at Camp Navajo in northern, and that was due to the federal government involvement. So there is a responsibility, I believe, to this community, and we're in the process of restoring the federal building. So there's a lot of properties that, you know, Mesa has. I just don't want to see us continually to lose these properties. And we have. I wish we had Franklin School instead of the parking lot on Main Street. I mean, I wish we had Old Mesa High School. And there's a lot of buildings that would be nice for this community to have. The old Opera House that is hidden in downtown, built in 1898. It's still there, but it's hidden. So we have a lot of this history that we talk to our kids about in Our Mesa. We publish it and we put it out to the schools to use to show our kids, here's all these historic buildings, and then we can't take them to them because we tore them down. So I'm just hoping that we stop doing that by recognizing the importance of some of these buildings.
Okay, so I interpret this as more of a preemptive move. Is there anything pending or about to happen with this building? The Plaza project, is that going to have any impact on this?
Chairman Carter, Board Member Clement, there's nothing in the foreseeable future that would do anything to this building. The closest thing would be any discussions about creation of an urban plaza, but that's we haven't even started any design work on that yet, much less have any funding to make anything happen for that project to know that it would specifically affect this building.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your answers.
So that answered one of my questions, and I appreciate the work that Mesa Preservation Society is doing, and I saw a lot of your work when we reviewed the sign, when we were reviewing the sign code, and I appreciate that. There's a delicate balance between buildings that should be protected and growth and the use of those buildings, their intended use, and then potentially a future use and infill and all of those kinds of things. And that's a real difficult thing to sort of predict and project over a long period of time. But I think it's a wonderful thing. I would say to this that we should identify not just one building, but we should identify a number of buildings and then place some priority on them and kind of keep them at the forefront of these discussions. But really my question and my comment is to staff is that if this were to be approved as a historic landmark designation, could it not then come through this process? Is there a permanent protection that designation provides, or could this not then end up back here again and it be changed again to a different designation? That's my first part of my question.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Board Member Arnett, it is a zoning action to establish this overlay district. And so it is possible in the future that there could be a decision to remove the overlay district and go through a zoning action again to change the zoning back so that the overlay district is no longer there. That's certainly a possibility.
So then it seems to me that we're kind of going about this the wrong way, and awareness really is what we're seeking here, is kind of what I'm gathering. Because if the city wanted to change it, they could change it. If it didn't fit in their need, they could come here and we could go through this process again. And it would be very easy, somewhat easy, to make that change if the city needs it and they build a good case that that's the best for the city. I think that an awareness of what you're doing, the work that you're doing, and protecting the history of this city is, again, a delicate balance. And I think that it's an awareness thing, and we probably need to develop a list or develop a plan or something like that that is much more visible to this group, maybe to City Council, and maybe get sort of the consensus of the citizens as to what they think it should be protected and is historic for this city. Just kind of a comment. But as I see this, it's kind of like we're taking one building. There's no immediate threat, as we've discussed, and this really isn't serving much of a purpose. The real purpose is awareness, which is, I think, an important purpose.
Vince?
Just one question. With this designation, like this building has morphed over the years, it still can be reused, adapted to other uses. There's nothing precluding that from happening, correct?
That's correct.
And in terms of adding to it or additions to that building, as long as they're done with cognizant of the historic nature of it, that's a possibility as well.
That's correct.
Thanks.
But does it add then to the hoops, I guess, that you would, yes, and the length of the project probably?
Chairman Carter, Board Member Coons, within the parameters that are laid out in the report, there are certain things that can happen without any additional action outside of just the normal process, but then there are those that are specified when the Historic Preservation Office would get involved in reviewing those modifications to ensure that the modifications would be in keeping with the Secretary of Interior standards and maintain the integrity of the building. So, yes, it would add some to that. That's correct.
I certainly don't want to see this torn down, or I don't have any feeling toward that. I mean, I have lived here all my life. I've been to this library many times and love to see it. But I hate to add to the regulatory burden of trying to do some small project that might need to be done or that would be in the best interest of the taxpayers of the city to use this building. And I did get a huge chuckle out of reading your little handout where it said you had a professional engineer who came and evaluated the building, finding it in pristine condition. He stated that it is well constructed and should last for hundreds of years. I thought that was pretty interesting, which means to me that it is a possibility the use will be changed there. And I certainly, as far as taxpayers, we do want to use it. We want it used. So I'm trying to get that balance too. And when there's no immediate threat, then I'm really wondering. But I guess if there's an immediate threat, we're way past the time to set up some guidelines. So have I made any decision at all?
Have you?
Mr. Chairman, Beth, I've known you for years. And the thing about it is we've got to be proactive, not reactive on preservation projects. You have to. If you're not, then what's to stop the city from passing hiring Mr. DeBella or another architectural firm and say, we want you to go over to the IT building and tear off all that decorative block. Just get rid of it so we can open up and see the windows. It'll happen. It can happen. Right now, it can happen. With nobody knowing about it, no action being taken care of. That's an integral part of the architecture of that building, and it really should not be removed or taken off. And if we don't put protection on some of these items, then they can happen. These things can very easily happen. That beautiful two-story staircase in there and the glass element could be covered up with something. Why not? It's an energy hog. It loses BTUs of heat all the time. It's an energy hog. Tear it off. We don't like it. We want to block it up. That's an integral part of the architectural feature of that building. The floating concrete stairway in there. We don't build them anymore. We can't afford to build them anymore. Yet we have one in this community that's floating up through that entry that is a really nice element of that building. It could be taken out and a steel stairway put in its place. These are the things that can happen to the buildings if we as a citizenry, as we as a group do not say, that's important. That building's important to this community. And you know what? Very talented individuals within this community can adapt that building to any use without destroying the significant architectural features of the building. I've already done 2 projects inside the building. You don't know about them, but they were done. They didn't change the outside, but they made the building more functional for the people inside. So those things can happen. So what we're trying to do is protect that architectural features, those elements of the building that make it significant to the community.
Isn't there a better way other than a zoning change? I mean, can't we develop some kind of a list or an awareness or some kind of a list of structures or places that we deem or a community deems as, let's ask a question before we just, do whatever we want to it. Isn't there something that we can develop that says, well, this is a different kind of a building. We need to ask more questions, as opposed to going this drastic now?
Mr. Chairman, Board Member Arnett, certainly there are some things along that line in terms of having historic register of properties that we deem are important. The official way to get on the Mesa Register is through this zoning process and getting the overlay district established. There are other ways that it could be done. We had this very discussion with the City Council in a study session 9 months ago or so as we were considering this action, and we talked about the option of just having the council pass some kind of resolution saying this is an important building, we will treat it carefully and have discussion before we do anything to it. After having that discussion, they chose to go this rezoning route as the preferred way to help ensure the long-term maintenance of this building.
I would be much more in favor of not doing this and providing some kind of another alternative. I don't know what that is. I would say to staff, maybe we continue this and then let's work on maybe an alternative solution would be my recommendation on this one.
But did I not just hear you say the city council wants to do this? So what difference does it make as we pass this through? I'm trying to decide why we're having this discussion as I heard that.
Well, Chairman Carter, Board Member Coons, they do rely on the process then. We gave them some basic background information. They need the review and input from the citizens and from their advisory bodies to help them then with that final decision. And you've raised some valid discussion points, some of the same ones we brought up initially about the functionality of this building to meet the needs of the city, and are we hamstringing ourselves? And you're echoing some of those concerns that we brought up before, so that's good for the record. And, again, they value the input from the different boards. And so I think you do need to consider what you think is best for this building, for the city, and, vote your conscience according to that, and we take that back to the council, and they'll weigh the various input they've received.
If I might comment, I appreciate your thoughts here. Yes, the council may go forward with it, but I agree with you that we need to send them a message, and basically I'm agreeing with Mr. Arnett is while I'm not opposed to what you're attempting to do by any stretch, I think it needs to be a little bit more enlarged to identify a group of properties that may meet some specific qualifications and then provide some language where they're protected, which forces a look at the property before anything drastic can be done to them. I must have said the wrong thing.
Well, I think they went over to talk to the guy who put the historic preservation ordinance together.
Well, let me chime in on my end of things.
Sure, go right ahead.
I do a lot of historic preservation in many different states. I've got 2 church buildings I'm doing, one in El Paso and one in Blanding, Utah, that were built in the early 1900s. One in El Paso is under historic preservation issues with Texas. The one in Blanding, Utah isn't. And I do have some real questionable issues with putting this under a zoning classification. But I'll wait till Ms. Benj?
Yes, sir.
Has a chance to speak. We do need you to state your name and address.
Donna Benj, 45 East 9th Place, Unit 90, Mesa, Arizona. Across the street from the Fitch House landmark, by the way. I'm a past member of the Historic Preservation Board, and I want you to know that the board continually looks at properties, making decisions about if they should be landmarks or if an area should be a historic neighborhood. The citizens do the same thing. They decide if an area should be a historic area or maybe a certain building should be designated as a landmark or on the National Register. So this is an ongoing thing in this city that happens all the time. This is not unique.
Thank you. I'm a transplant to Mesa. I remember when we first moved here in 1979 of using this as the public library. I am not enamored with the building. I'm not a fan of mid-century modern, but that's a personal opinion. My biggest issue is with a complete zoning classification for this instead of another method that would more clearly secure the preservation of the building. Right now, according to this historic overlay standards thing that you all handed out, they could still come in and do some pretty radical change to this as long as it got approval from you all and historic, which who knows down in the future, who might be there, what political pressure might be put on people to do things. So this doesn't seem like the ideal solution to the preservation of this building. Do we not have any other options, John?
Mr. Chairman, speaking of options, this isn't maybe exactly answering your question, but that's what we were just discussing, is in terms of options for a motion that you might have, you could do a continuance from this board so that there could be further discussion, and so it stays at this board while we do further investigation. You could recommend denial. You could recommend approval. You could recommend to council that they delay action until further study is done about options and putting together some of the plans that you have suggested here to see how this fits into a larger scheme for the downtown. There may be other options too that you could come up with, but so there's basically suggesting to council that they continue instead of continuing at this level, so it does get back to them, and then they can take your input and either decide to, yes, you were right, we should do more study, or go ahead and vote it up or down themselves, but it gets it on to them for further action.
So just a general question from the board. What, just listening to everyone's comments, and they're all good, unless there's something that has some teeth in it in terms of designating it or protecting it, then what's the point? Trying to find something that identifies that it should be preserved, but if there isn't any teeth behind it, what Ron described as happening will happen. Changes will occur, and things will go away, and no one will be the wiser. When we're off this board and time marches on, what's the document, or what's the element that's going to identify as worthy of protecting? And I say protection in the sense that the value of the architecture, but it's still allowing the building to function. You still can adapt, reuse it in other capacities. So that's the concern, I think, is there isn't anything that really identifies it that allows it to be designated, just like our zoning code. Why do we have a zoning code? It's to designate properties and areas for a certain designation. I don't see it as any different than that, in my opinion.
But in this, following what you said, if they're doing, it seems odd that we're doing it to just one building.
Yeah.
It seems like the entire downtown area should have this same status, but it doesn't.
But you also,
why doesn't it have that?
Well, we're talking a public building here, not a private building. There's differences of all kinds of things down there.
True.
And so maybe this is the most effective way to preserve it, leave some flexibility, put a bunch of new regulations on anybody who wants to look at it. I don't know.
But you still have the same situation. You have some, well, at least in my personal opinion, much more interesting and historic architecture in the city than this building, but it's not, it's in peril of truly being destroyed.
Randy, I bet they would like more people on their board to look at different properties to help them designate those.
Can we ask you to do it?
I'm no architect, Randy.
I agree with Mr. DeBella, and also the chair in relation to this being a one-off. And I think really we need to take a step back and do it right and look at a comprehensive approach as opposed to a one-off. It appears as though there might be a threat here, so we decided let's go ahead and put a historical, landmark designation on it. And I don't think that's right. My opinion would be that we hold off, we have staff go back and research if there isn't a better way to do it. If there's not, fine. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think council knows. I don't think we know, and I don't think that staff yet has done the research that we need them to do to really make a good decision on this, because I believe in preservation, but again, beauty is always in the eye of the beholder. So that's something that we can't engage ourselves in, but we do need to make sure that the process is most appropriate so that it's a much more comprehensive approach and we know all of our options. So I don't think we're there yet. So my recommendation would be for a continuance so that staff could have some time to do some research and see if this, and again, I would hate to waste time, but I do think it's important enough for us to take some time to pause a little bit, regardless of if you think it's a nice building or not. I don't think that that really matters in this point.
Well, I'd like to plan it on that because it's true. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I personally think that if the building has stayed for about 40 years in pretty much the same condition on the exterior, that was the way that Hickman designed it. It should stay that way. We shouldn't be having the opportunity to stick stuff on the south side or do other changes to it, which are not in true harmony with the original vision for the building. And so this allows them to go ahead and they could change the entire look of the building depending on what they did on the south side, with approval on the north side. You know, true, the staircase and the glazing at the corner entrance is a nice feature, but that's only a part of the whole design that was envisioned when this was built. I think that it needs to be a little more solid here. That okay, if we're going to have this as a historic landmark designation, then by golly, it's got to stay just the way it is within the parameters of the exterior walls. Unless there's some kind of an emergency failing, like, you know, a column fails or something like that that has to be repaired, and it has to be repaired exactly the way that it was. That's going to end up enormously expensive for the city should anything happen in that sense. But that is my opinion.
Mr. Chairman,
I think we're at a point where we need a motion.
I think so, but just a couple of comments very quickly. First, on your comments just now. The Secretary of Interior standards for the maintenance and rehabilitation and so forth of historic buildings does provide for ways to add on to existing buildings to maintain the historic integrity and character of the building. And so that's anticipated that will happen and could happen. That's why we've allowed for it here. It's also based on the operational discussions with the IT building about what's most important to them for them to be able to handle their functions in the building.
I'm sorry, that if we're doing this as a landmark, historic landmark, that should have no bearing on the validity of this being a historic, important building in the city of Mesa. We shouldn't go around fiddling with it if that's going to be that designation. Of course, I don't know what the rest of the board members feel, but that's a personal opinion. As soon as we start messing around with it, it would be like if you looked at the Brasilia, which you brought up as an example, a beautiful mid-century social engineering experiment. It didn't work. But even now today, it's pretty well pristine to what it was before because they're working inside the existing structures. This should be the same way, in my opinion. If it's worthy of historic landmark status, then it should stay the way it is. I'm sorry if it's inconvenient for the technology group. They then need to move somewhere else, and this could be used as an office for expanding city services or whatever. But we shouldn't go be adding things on the side, up, wherever, if truly this is a historic landmark.
Okay.
If it's not, then why are we doing this?
Mr. Carter, is still a public taxpayer building.
Yes.
Which is being used, and if there's a way to keep the integrity of the architecture and add on to it, which is what they're suggesting they would be looking at if there was some project that needed to be done, I think that's the balance we're trying to walk here. Preserving the architecture, but keeping the usefulness and the taxpayer dollars being used. So I don't know.
Taxpayers are notoriously fickle. And so if we're going for an historic,
That was a broad brush, but.
I'm sorry, historic landmark status, then this building is deemed important. It should, the architecture of the day was rectilinear. This is a pretty pristine example of mid-century modern, of what you were talking about earlier. We shouldn't monkey with it. Work on the inside what you need to do, but don't play around with the outside, even at the expense of taxpayer paying a little extra money because they're going to have to move somewhere else.
So are you opposed to the stipulations or the negotiated, I can't even think, I guess stipulations that are in the report?
I am. See, I will have to, if we vote on this the way it stands right now, I will not vote for this because I disagree with the historic overlay standards that are permitted on that building. If it's, like I said, if it's important enough for historic landmark status, most of this stuff should go away. And the exterior skin of the building should remain pristine as it exists at this time.
Tough.
Well, I think that should be the intent of that designation, but I don't think that we're there yet. I don't think that we need to step back. We're not there yet. If professionals and citizens and those that understand architecture and design and history of the city, if they deem it to be something that should be protected, then we go here.
So,
Randy, the way you
Yes, sir.
speak then, if you would, as an architect, so tell me, what I hear you saying is, what we're doing isn't if we do this, it kind of puts a window dressing, but it doesn't put any teeth in really preserving what we're trying to preserve.
that's my opinion.
That's your opinion. So then, alternatively, what would we do? Come back if we're going to do this specific language specific to this building, which would then set a precedence for other properties that hopefully we're going to identify with historic potential.
Well, I would think that amending the historic overlay standards to be site-specific might be the way to go. Because this is a specific site.
Yes, it is.
And so if we're dealing with a specific site, just like stipulations on any other zoning case, this would have a set of stipulations limiting or enhancing whatever needs to be done.
Remind me where those came from. I thought they were negotiated through the Historic Preservation Group and the city. Am I correct?
He would like to talk if you'd like to hear from him.
He's up and down and up and down.
While Gordon's coming up, then these particular standards are the result of the discussions between our office, the IT office, and the City Council and the Historic Preservation Board on what combination of things we feel meets everybody's needs. And I'll say it one more time. The national procedures through the Secretary of the Interior allow for additions to historic structures. So what we're proposing here is no different than what's allowed across the country when you designate a historic structure to allow some of those modifications, additions, as long as you maintain those key characteristics so you can still.
Well, I do understand that, but I'm saying that in a zoning case, that this is,
right.
Okay, it's not the historic register or anything like that, but in a zoning case like this, on a building, if it's deemed truly worthy for this designation, then we should not allow, on this particular case here, a violation of the exterior skin of the building, which was a very important architectural feature when it was designed. Now, would I do the same thing on other projects? Would I feel the same way? Probably, cases down the road? Maybe not. The First Methodist Church? Maybe not. But on this particular item, that's the only one under consideration at the moment, I think if the board feels that this is a truly historic building worthy of landmark status, then we should keep it, the skin, as it exists right now. Do whatever you want to on the inside, but the skin and the wavy entrance thing on the back side, don't monkey with it. Keep it for the next generations as an example of mid-century modern. That's the personal opinion.
But Mr. Carter, do you want to now become the board that negotiates this between the city and the historic preservation and the IT people and the planning department? Is that what this board should become?
No,
They've done that and done it well. So
I would disagree with you on that one. Because every building is individual. Everyone has a different set of issues.
You have just talked me into voting for this.
We'll vote for it.
Mr. Chairman?
I do think it needs to be wider through the whole city, but yes, sir, Mr. Sheffield.
I think it might be helpful if the board understood a little bit of why there is an historic preservation ordinance and why there's a separate overlay district for historic districts and historic landmarks. I wrote the ordinance back in 1990. It's the first ordinance I wrote in 1995. I'm wearing the scars of that particular debate to this day. The reason for there's two is because the districts are considered differently. Districts aren't just the individual buildings themselves. It's the context of the buildings in aggregation that's important in the district, as opposed to an individual piece of architecture that's significant in the community. So there's a distinction that the ordinance creates in doing that. And the recommendations that come forward from most of the national organizations that do historic preservations is that you recognize the distinction. The second thing is that most of the historic preservation that's done usually has no teeth to it. Most of the time, it ends up, especially on the national level, unless there's federal funding that's involved in that particular project, placing your property on the National Register of Historic Properties basically is a listing. It's nothing more than that. It has no teeth. Basically, it's a nice thing. You can maybe put a plaque on the wall of your residence or whatever you're doing. But other than that, it really doesn't have anything to that.
Well, from public attention.
What's that?
Public attention.
Yes. But in terms of anything that says that we think this building is important and therefore it merits special attention should anything different happen to it or be proposed for it, then there isn't anything.
I disagree with that. Having to deal with Texas and their...
Well, you're in Arizona.
Well, I know, but you opened up the thing by saying national.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Texas is not that way. Louisiana on their historic buildings are not that way. Once they become on the historic register, they're locked in. It takes an act of God sometimes, and I say that duly, to be able to modify them in any way. Insides are pretty open, depending on the year of the architecture. But once you get past earlier than, say, 1850 to 1800, even the interiors become sacred to them. And they're very, very difficult to get modifications to. Arizona may be like, who cares? It's on Arizona's register.
Well, and that's part of the issue. The reason that we have the overlay district is because there was this recognition in the community that there are some significant buildings, that there are buildings in the community that are worth preserving. And therefore, the thought is that if there's enough of an interest in the community, that they would put together and organize some sort of committee or petition or something to that, then they can present that through this process to the P&Z board, at the time it was the Historic Preservation Subcommittee. It's now gone from subcommittee to committee. Now it's a full board. But they can present that to those folks. Then they present that petition to the City Council. If the City Council agrees with the petition that's derived from the citizens, then they have the opportunity to provide that preservation. Landmark status only means that the building in itself is considered unique and worth preserving. That's all that it means. The process itself doesn't do anything to the use. It doesn't restrict the council in any way from how they use that building. They can sit here and strip it clean in terms of the interior of the building itself. As long as they don't affect the outside of it, there's no additional reviews that take place. The only thing that happens is they add any additions to it. There's a design review process. There's a design review process anyway, because it's a city building and DR is already part of the process. So in terms of additional reviews, basically they are already having to prepare for DR. They just have an historic DR that goes as part of that. In terms of the other thing that it does is that it basically says that if for some reason someone wants to demolish the building, that we take some time, think about it first. After 6 months, that basically that delay in the demolition goes away. That's the only thing that this overlay district does. So in terms of, there's not a huge bunch of piling on in terms of bureaucratic regulations. It just says, we need to think about this before we make any changes. That's the purpose of the regulation. And I wanted to make sure the board understood that. Thank you.
Are we at a point where we are having a motion?
I will make a motion. I will make a motion that we hold on to this and continue to our next meeting and give, Mr. Sheffield wrote this in 19 when? He's learned a lot in that time frame. I'm sure that there might be a better way, just to see if there's potentially a better way only. Let's continue it until then would be my motion and revisit it.
Is there a second? Okay, that motion has died. Is there another motion?
Good oral. I think this is the only mechanism we have in this particular case. So I'm going to move for approval, make a motion for approval Z13-033HL.
Is there a second?
I'll second that because of Gordon's explanation that it's not so restrictive, that they can't do the things, but it just brings some thought to the process. So I will second that motion.
All right, please cast your votes. We have Mr. Arnett and myself, nays, and the rest are approval. So it does approve. I'd just like to state that the only reason that I am voting no on this is because I feel that does not have enough teeth in the ordinance. We need to, if we're going to protect a building, we need to truly protect it and let the things fly where they need to. All right, is there any other comments from board members? Right, we stand adjourned until next month's meeting.
Wednesday.
Oh, next Wednesday's meeting on the 28th.